Lily, thank you for recording. My name is Tom Battye. I'm the work group leader for EMCC when it comes to supervision quality standards. And that means that I facilitate a group of volunteers who develop the EMCC product range in relation to supervision. And it's nice to see Michelle here and Anna here. And I didn't notice anyone else who's a member of my team, but if there is, forgive me, I can't see everyone's faces on the screen. It's a pleasure to be talking and discussing things with you today. And it's really lovely to see faces and names of people who I've met before or spoken to before. So please do contribute and join into the conversation. Let's make it a real conversation. And I would like to include some breakout group time so that it's possible for us to have smaller conversations as well as big ones. But as we're going along, if you have a question or a thought and you think it's worth sharing, then just put your hand up or even interrupt me and share it, because I think that's important. Now, what I'd like to do, and the purpose really of today's session, is to show you the competence framework, the EMCC Supervision Competence Framework, the latest version of it, and to make sure that it makes sense to everyone. May I ask, first of all, for a show of hands or just wave at the screen if you already know the EMCC Competence Framework and you're familiar with it and you feel like you have an understanding of it already. So if that's you, wave at the screen so I can see your hands waving. Okay, there's quite a and Deb, you've got one of those wobbly maybes coming through there. I noticed that there were quite a lot of people here who are invisible. That's great. Your photographs do you proud. But if you want to switch your videos on so we can see you, that would be nice too, because then I will be able to respond to your reactions, and I think it would improve the experience for everybody else to feel like we're in one room together rather than some of us being somewhere else. So it's always nice to see you, and don't worry, we're not going to be looking at you. I'm the one who everyone's got to suffer that experience of. So let's the plan is this: to go through the competence framework. I will show you the slides, and I will invite us all to discuss some of the parts of it. So let's just see if I can actually move them on. So here we have the main point. The main point of the supervision framework is that it is not a statement from a dictator. So EMCC is not delivering an edict from a higher authority that says this is what you must do, thou shalt supervise in this way. Actually, what we've done is we've taken a lot of time and trouble to come up with suggestions. We've identified 8 competence headings, but within those, we believe that it's up to you as a supervisor to decide how to interpret it and what supervision means for you. So in other words, the process of supervision is fundamentally a relational process. It's not a tick box exercise. And this is a mistake that people often make whenever a competence framework is created, because in order to create a competence framework, you need to make a list. And then when people see the list, they think, oh, I'm supposed to do all these things on it. Let's not think that way. Let's remember that supervision is a relationship, and humans are in relationship, and we're all participating in the complex thing that is systems and human systems and relationships across and within human systems, and supervision is part of that. And in order for us to deliver effective supervision, it's really helpful to have some guidance, and that's what we hope the framework offers. Now, can I just check that everyone can see the slides? I don't know how well known it is, but I have my screen set so that I can see the faces and the slides. If you want to do that, then you just go to view options at the top and then scroll down to side-by-side mode, so which puts the slides on the left and the faces on the right. But let's just move on. So, having set the context let me show you the actual framework itself. So in summary, it looks like this. We have the first section, which is to do with contracting. The second section, which is to do with the functions of supervision. So if you're a supervisor, you'll be familiar with normative, formative, restorative, or what we're calling developmental, qualitative, and supportive functions of supervision. So far, contained, I have mentioned the parts of the framework that cover 4 out of the 8 competencies. We'll actually look at them in more detail later, but just to give you an overview, the first one relates to contracting. The second part of the framework contains 3 competencies, and they relate to the functions of supervision. The next part of the framework contains another 3 competencies, and they relate to what we call supervisor capacity. And here we're talking less about what the supervisor is doing and more about how the supervisor is being. And then finally we've got the final competence here, which is to do with groups. So it's an 8-part framework with 8 primary competence headings. It's divided into 4 parts. And the first one is contracting, the second part is functions, the third part is capacities, and the fourth part is to do with groups. So I am actually going to whiz through the whole thing, okay? And then at the end, we'll have more of a dialogue about what we mean by this concept of capacities. And what I'm inviting you to start thinking about now is what that term means for you. So in other words, maybe be prepared to discuss in pairs in breakout rooms. And Lily, if you don't mind being responsible for creating the breakout rooms when we get there, be prepared to discuss in pairs and breakout rooms what that means to you. This notion of capacity, what it is that a supervisor is versus does. So that's a little kind of droplet to kind of be thinking of. First of all, let's go through the framework. So I'm going to talk you through the 8 competencies, and we've got the first one up on the screen already, and it's to do with managing the supervision contract and process. Now, let's not take too much time to study the bullet points in there. It's not important for us today to understand all of that in detail. The main thing is the definition, which is establishes and maintains a working contract with the supervisee and manages the supervision process effectively. So we think that the first competence needs to cover the contract. And we consider that the contract is not just a transactional exchange of expectations. It goes beyond the transaction. In other words, it covers the practical, the professional, and the relational or the psychological aspect of the relationship. And so on each one of these slides, I've highlighted a word just to make something stand out from the sea of text in the middle. And the word that I've highlighted on this slide is relational, because it seems to be such an important part of the underlying establishment of an agreement between supervisor and supervisee. So now we're moving into the second part of the framework, which covers the old favorites, the supervision functions. So we'll look at the developmental function first, which you may know as being the formative function. So in the developmental function, what we've got is the competence called facilitates development, enables the supervisee to improve the standard of their practice through a process of facilitated reflection. So here you can see a key word for EMC, which is the word reflection. For EMCC, reflective practice is fundamental. We really believe that coaches, mentors, and supervisors need to prioritize their reflective practice in order to maintain the quality of their work and for us all to learn. And so it's right there in the middle of one of the definitions of one of the competencies. I've highlighted challenge and disrupt because on one of the previous versions of this competence framework, one of the criticisms that we got was that it was too friendly and warm and nice. And it sounded like we were saying that all the supervisor needs to do is to provide a kind of happy place for the supervisee. And of course, we don't think that. It's just rather difficult to find the right words to say that we want to kind of disturb people's thinking. Even an expression like disturb people's thinking is difficult to publish as a set of guidelines that could be used across the world. And one of the people who gave us feedback said, well, what a supervisor does is they want to create a shift in the room. That if you're sitting with your supervisee, there needs to be a shift in the way that supervisee, a shift in perspective that occurs right here, right now in the room before they even go. But then we couldn't use the word shift in the room because that sounded like we were trying to move furniture around. So eventually we settled on challenge and disrupt the supervisee's existing perspectives, assumptions, and paradigms. And so alongside providing the necessary support and other ways of helping a supervisee develop, we're insisting on this language, which is challenge and disrupt the supervisee's existing perspectives, assumptions, and paradigms. Now, just purely out of interest, you can wave at the screen again. How many people in this room filled in the questionnaire when I sent it to the Americas network? Because we did that. Martine did. Lillian did. Okay, not very many. Kathleen, thank you. Oh, a few more remembering now, thanks. So this is partly a result of your feedback, the changes that we're seeing here. So let's move on to the next one. So provide support. Okay, the supportive or resourcing function of supervision. Of course, this is really important. And I've highlighted the words, it creates a safe, reflective space for the supervisee. All of the components here are equally important. I still maintain that they are not a checklist, that it is for the individual supervisor to interpret what we've written here and make it meaningful for you and to find your own way of working with it. So there we have that one. And then finally, the normative function or the qualitative function, where we've included the maintaining a professional practice, maintaining an ethical practice, and maintaining a reflective practice. So in here, I thought, well, so I'm assuming that if I'm going too fast or too slow, please let me know. But I'm assuming that everyone knows what I mean. When we're talking about professional standards, this means things like being, being professional, being a member of a professional body, abiding by a code of ethics, keeping appropriate logs of your learning and appropriate logs of your work. So it's about being a good professional rather than kind of an amateur who's doing this in your kind of spare time. But in there, I decided what to highlight. And I thought it would be interesting to highlight current debates because it kept on coming up actually in the feedback that we got from the surveys, both when we showed it to the Americas network and subsequent surveys. People said, we think it's important that supervisors in coaching and mentoring need to be aware of what's going on around the world and what's impacting our profession, both supervision and coaching and mentoring. So I think I've spoken for 10 minutes without stopping now. Why don't we just hear some other voices? This is your opportunity to share. What do you think the current debates are impacting our profession as supervisors and coaches? There are some big ones right now. What are they? I invite you to speak.
So
Meryl.
Tom, this is Meryl. Yeah, thank you. Well, this whole idea of being on Zoom, and depending on what country you're working with, I work in China a lot, the challenge of anonymity when the state is overseeing what goes on with Zoom in China. So we have that issue is big, big, big. And, you know, they ask you to sign your life away, and I can't, you know, I don't use Zoom at all anymore. I'm going to a different platform because of that. And I can't use any of the China Zoom lookalikes because of the exact same reason.
Okay.
Meryl, which platform do you use?
I'm going into Hop Into.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, fascinating. That's such a, I'm so glad I asked that question because I have never encountered that yet. And so you've helped me remain up to date with current debates. What are the other ones that come to mind?
Tom, this is Deb Dennis. I don't know if this is a current debate. I know that it came up as part of group contracting with a group that I just worked with. They asked very specifically to have a no judgment zone because people coming into supervision, you know, there's this idea of a supervisor and a supervisee. And because of people's experiences, sadly, they asked for a no judgment zone. Is anyone else talking about that as a current issue?
Fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit more about what we mean by a no judgment zone? Because I'll leave my question open. Go for it.
Nope. Come, tell me the rest.
Well, because my initial reaction is that it sounds like what it is that we're trying to create anyway, that we want to create an environment in which people feel not judged. And so I wonder if there's something different, like in this request.
No, there isn't. That is exactly what they are asking for, that safe environment that we are trying to do anyway. With limited exposure to supervision, it has come up as something people want to contract for. So I ask, what may we do as a professional organization if this is something that we're talking about? Or is it just my group?
Fascinating. When you say zone, what do you mean by zone?
Space.
But for an individual or a group or a whole community or beyond?
I would say individual and group. So wherever the supervision is taking place.
So Deb, I think it's a really wonderful concept and fascinating as well. And my intention in asking the question is not to delve too much into each of the examples that are shared. It's rather to say, that's interesting. And then what else? So is it okay if I say, that's interesting, and invite anyone else to add what other current debates there are that we think? I mean, so I don't want to add any of my own. Let's hear one more from somebody, and then we can move on.
Anything related to the professional concept of coaching?
The concept of coaching.
Well, I mean, maybe I'm coming from a market which is not so developed as some others, and well, everyone seems to be a coach nowadays, and on top of that, you have to add something else. So you're not a good coach if you're not, I don't know, you have another skills or have another masters or another tools or whatever. Okay. But some of the things that really affect professionality, in my opinion, is the way we really are, acting as a professional. I don't know if does it make sense to you?
It does make sense to me because I find that too. I call myself a coach, and then I look on LinkedIn and there are people who are promoting themselves as coaches, but they're doing something very different from me. For example, there's this in my observation, it looks like there's a resurgence of the life coach, where a lot of people are talking about kind of living your dream. And I wonder whether this touches upon what you're saying, because as a coach, I'm not necessarily talking about kind of helping people kind of live their dream. So I think it's a good point. The definition of coaching and how well it is understood and how well it is differentiated, and perhaps there's something there. So thank you, Alfonso. I'm going to move on, and I'm interested actually that no one mentioned climate change, and oh look, Catherine just did. So good point, and let's move on. So we're now going to look at the 3 capacities. So they are, the first one is self-awareness. So consciously uses and develops their self in service of the supervision, relationship, and process. I've highlighted the notion of using self as instrument here. So in my mind, what I'm referring to is the degree to which we use every thought, feeling, sensation that we experience as data that informs us about the relationship, the coach's experience, and so forth into the system. So how well is the coach, sorry, the competence relates to the supervisor using themselves as an instrument in their supervision practice to support their supervisee. So an important part of everything that we do, but something which I think all of us do in different measures according to our personal approach and other factors as well. So in other words, it's about how the supervisor is being. Previously, we were thinking about things the supervisor can do in order to maintain their professional practice, for example. But now these competencies relate to a broader capacity. And we use the word capacity because it has implications. You know, the word capacity comes from words, you know, a history of, you know, a linguistic source that is to do with holding, being able to hold. What is the capacity of the individual to hold experience, for example, or to hold the space, or to, you know, create a safe space for a person who feels vulnerable, and ensure that that container for that person is secure. So that it's a good word, I think, for describing how the supervisor is being right here, right now. And it also has implications to do with strength. You know, what is the capacity of this?
Oh.
Lillian, go for it. Were you just shouting at the TV?
My daughter.
Okay. And it's also, I think, got implications beyond volume, but also to do with strength in a positive way. So let's move on to relationship awareness. So here we've got the competence that relates to understanding and working with the layers of relationship that exist within the supervision process. So you can see here it's expanding beyond the previous competence, from self to relationship, and you can see already it's stretching into systems because the relationships make up the systems. But we felt as though it was helpful to have a stage in between, because there's the relationship with the client. So whereas, I mean, if you're working with the 7-eyed model, for example, the previous competence, self-awareness, may relate to mode 6. Relationship awareness goes beyond that. You know, you're thinking of maybe modes 3, 5, and 7, the relationships between the people in the immediate system, and then of course beyond that. And I highlighted maintains effective boundaries, just because I think it follows on from the previous one. You know, use of the self. How am I using myself? Well, I can use myself effectively if I am careful about how I manage my boundaries, noticing the thresholds and how they may be moving between my sense of who I am and who my client is and what's going on. Without that awareness, it's harder to notice what's going on, because it's harder to locate it anywhere. So, I mean, what you're getting from me today is very much my interpretation of this framework, and I hope that you're able to interpret it your own way. So then we've got the systems. Awareness is able to recognize and work with the dynamics of human systems. So it's a bit complicated, and I didn't highlight a word here, but maybe what I'd like to do is invite you to look at the whole slide and let me know, if you were to highlight a word, which would it be?
Systems.
It would be systems.
I'd go with power, influence, and relationship, because especially power these days is often underestimated.
Okay. Effects of power, influence. Go on, Diane.
Yeah, I was just noticing systems thinking. You didn't highlight it, but you have it in quotes. So that essence of thinking about the systems.
Yeah. So it's about being able to take the perspective, being able to shift one's perspective, and adopt a mindset that is operating from, I guess, a paradigm where what you're seeing is systems, rather than what you're first seeing being just individual objects. I guess this is, it refers to a perspective where what you're first seeing is systems. So Meryl's made a point about organizational awareness. Would you like to expand on that that you've dropped into the comments?
So my own experience, thank you. My own experience is usually the pain that I find in organizations is this lack of awareness, but usually the person is personalizing the system dynamics of a change. They don't understand that the system just went into chaos just because they entered the system, and not because of their personality, and not because people don't like them. And no matter where they are in the food chain, I have that kind of conversation all the time with people who I am either supervising, who are executives, or I'm coaching, and I have to bring that issue to my supervisor. So I have that encounter. I say 99% of the coaching and supervision of anybody inside an organization.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. And I wondered whether your thoughts were, whether you that contained a suggestion that there was something missing from this list.
Well, I think that this awareness of systems theory would be very beneficial for supervisors, not just some sort of system method, but to understand, as an underpinning, understand what happens in a system, whether it's an organization, a family, what are the kind of rules of the system that a supervisor should at least have spitting familiarity with.
I would agree. That's what I just made a comment too. It's like there are different, like defining systems and a little bit more, because there's personal, there's, family, there's organizational, there's team group on a smaller level, there's psychological systems, there's many, I think it's what Meryl said too. I'm just in violent agreement with Meryl.
Thanks. And I'm sure members of...
build up on that? Can I build up on that?
Please,
Just
Martine, go ahead.
Yeah, I do agree with Meryl and Lillian that it's very, very important that people have all that in mind and are able to... My point is slightly different. What we're looking at is capability indicators. So the knowing of the theory is illustrated through the capability of working with system thinking frameworks. That to me was sufficient, because I don't see how people can efficiently work with system thinking frameworks if they don't get it, what's the theory, and identify the different systems, etc. And my guess is that the reason why it doesn't say system theory, it's because we're not in a theory box, I'd say. But maybe I'm wrong.
So that you're right. It's the whole. focus of our work is to create a framework that is useful, that people can literally apply. And one of the factors here is how much more there is to say, and how difficult it is to filter the sheer quantity of good material that would be relevant to this. And but we also accept that there are improvements. You know, this took us about a year of discussion and analysis of people's feedback and debate, but of course it's still something that's just produced by people and their brains. And we'd love, you know, after it's been used for a couple of years, to see how people are getting on with it and whether there's a way that we can address some of these important parts even better. So then let's just move on to the final bit, which is relevant for working with groups. So the final competence facilitates group supervision, which only applies if you are working with groups, but it's so important to if you are working with groups, to have some skills that are associated with working with groups. And as we all have experienced, sometimes we've been in group situations where the person is highly skilled working one-to-one, but isn't highly skilled working one-to-many. And so this is effectively a competence that belongs in a supervision framework if the supervisor is working with groups. And you'll see that there's the reference to parallel process here that repeats. And it could repeat in all of the previous parts, I think. It's something to notice in self-awareness, something to notice in relationship awareness, something to notice in systems awareness, and of course, something to notice when working with groups. Okay. Right, so we've got, that's an overview of the whole thing. And I think it would be interesting to explore what it takes to develop the capacities. As I was saying earlier, we use that word to describe being rather than doing. And the word itself has an etymology that links to holding, the capacity to hold, and something to do with expansion and strength, like being able to hold more. How do we develop our capacities? How do we develop our self-awareness, relationship awareness, and systemic awareness? For me, it links to the use of the self. And so in about 1 minute, I'll decide what to do next in this call. But before I do that, can I check, because I'm not really reading all the comments in the chat, who has said something or written or read something in the chat that you think maybe follows on quite nicely at this point in time that would be useful for the group? Maybe you could, would anyone like to speak?
Tom, just briefly, that one of the key ways to answer the question you ask about how to be sure that you keep developing your capabilities is by working with your own supervisor.
Yes, it's a good point. Okay, in that case, I will just continue as planned. So recently I read a book, and so here I'm not speaking from the position of being an EMCC representative, I'm just speaking as Tom. I read Pamela McLean's book, Use of the Self. I'm very familiar with the notion of use of the self, but I thought she described it quite well in her book. Has anyone read it? Wave at the screen if you know the model. Quite a few people.
You actually presented here last year and at our conference. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So I'm just going to quickly show you, and then we can go into breakout rooms. So I just really liked her image, which is to do with developing our capacity to use ourselves. And I think it's personally a handy way to provide some guidance into how we might approach this matter. So speaking personally for myself, I like to start looking at embodiment. In other words, what am I doing to ground myself? And if I'm well grounded and well centered, then I'm more present. I can be here now with my clients and myself. I can let go of my inner chatter. And because that has cleared, then I'm more able to notice how I feel and the other thoughts and sensations that are happening inside me. So I'm becoming more here. Following that, I'm more open, more likely to receive the empathy or to experience the empathy with others. And developing my empathy or just having more empathic experiences brings an awareness of the boundaries between me and others and systems, and ultimately gives me material that I can use to carry out an intervention. In other words, material that I can rely on and have the courage to act from as I carry out a supervision intervention. So for me, it's a good model. But enough about me, and over to you. Lily, would it be okay to break us out into breakout rooms in pairs?
Sure.
Are you, I know you've made me a host, but have you still got the control to do that?
Yep, I've got 43 people in the room, so you want pairs and how long and the question?
Could you please give us 10 minutes in pairs? And the question is, and the question, when I say I mean you, how do I develop my capacity as a supervisor? And we can send it around as a broadcast message. So 10 minutes, how do I develop my capacity as a supervisor? And we'll come back here and we can share some of our thoughts about this.
All right.
Before you go, let me just quickly do one thing. I'm going to put the models that I've shared in the chat box to everyone, so that if you want to, you can download it. Tell me when you're ready.
All right, rooms are ready.
Okay, it's not going there, so we'll not do that idea. So the question is enough on its own. How do I develop my capacity as a supervisor? Ready, steady, go.
How long do we have, Tom?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Remember it too. I'm actually not as young as I look, obviously.
That was recorded, Tom.
Can we go back? We were having such a good conversation. Can we go back?
Yeah.
I don't know if I could recreate that again.
Deb, it's lovely
Sophie.
to hear that you were having a good conversation. But may I invite you to share something of it with us now? We've got literally only about 3 or 4 minutes, but if you could summarize some of the nice things, that would be lovely. And Deb, why don't we start with you, if you had a good experience there?
Oh, it was lovely. So we've agreed to reconnect so that we can continue the conversation. Yeah. It's an important topic. It's an important, good question, Tom. Good question. Thank you.
That's what we live for, isn't it? We live for good questions.
Tom, I want to say that vulnerability, I am Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Vulnerability is a key point for supervisors, coaches, mentors, and everyone.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
We talked about the fact that there is a relationship between self-awareness, relationship awareness, and systemic awareness and responsibility. The link, yeah.
And Michelle, you began another sentence there. What were you going to say? To link them?
Well, I think that self-awareness is competency number 1 for the,
Yeah.
in the EMCC coach competence framework. So I think that responsibility is an important value for EMCC. I mean, the coach and the supervisor have to be fully responsible of what they do.
Yes.
I have to understand what I'm going to do, why I'm going to do that, when I am going to do that.
Yeah.
And that's quite important. I think that it's not to deny intuition, but it's to use intuition with care.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Let's hear from one more team. Tracy, I can't help thinking that you might be about to speak.
Oh, no, I was actually more of an observer because they asked me how long I've been related to supervisor training, and I'm minus 1 day. I start tomorrow. And so I was just so appreciative of learning from the two that were in my group, actually, because I was fortunate to have two. So Maria and Catherine were sharing some of their experiences. And so I've taken copious notes, and I'm so excited to begin my journey.
That's really, really positive, and I'm very happy to hear that. So one more thought from one more person.
Okay, Tom, this is Eva from Brazil and Germany. I think self-compassion, supervising coaches want to be perfect. And actually they believe they're perfect. We believe we're perfect. So living with our imperfection, I think, is an essential skill. Yeah, Damon is laughing, but it's all the time. So it's shame comes in, everything comes in. So it starts with us, with our own compassion. I think that builds capacity.
Okay, brilliant. Self-compassion, responsibility, vulnerability. Thank you. So we're nearing the top of the hour, and I'd like to thank you for having me and wish you well, and hand back to Lily. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was great. Lots of good information. I love the framework. I love that it includes diversity and the ecosystem and doing versus end versus being. All great pieces that are quite advanced. So coming up next, let's see, what have we got on our list? Next month, Marilyn O'Hearn, Cultural Mindset and Supervision. This one is 75 minutes long, just so to mark your calendars. November 23rd, we have Karen Pratt from South Africa talking about transactional analysis and supervision, one of my favorite topics. And then in December 14th, we have Sam McGill coming in to talk about the poetics of supervision. And we've just secured John Leary Joyce to come in February 22nd for a 90-minute session on supervising team coaches. All of that's going to be on our website, so sign yourself up for the mailing list as well. Thank you, Tom. Damien, last thoughts?
A couple of more announcements. At the end of the month, we have with the Asian Coaching Supervisors Network a session on somatic coaching and supervision. So this is going to be a very interesting session. If people are available, for people in Europe, it's more difficult to come. It's in the middle of the night, but this is for the Asian coaches and supervisors. It's the last Tuesday in the evening, morning, Wednesday morning, the last Wednesday morning of the month in Asia. So I also, in the chat room, put a link to the conference we are organizing here locally in Los Angeles. It's a conference that we do in person every year, but this year is going to be virtually. And we have Lily going to be presenting, Peter Hawkins, Eve Turner are presenting with a conversation tone that you're bringing about thinking systemically. It's going to be all about systemic coaching, and we're going to be working with their new book on systemic coaching and bringing all of the issues that we need to be paying attention as coaches, but it will have an important supervision emphasis during the program. So I want to invite everybody to join us if you're available. And thanks everybody for coming. It's great having people from all over the world here, Tom. I think that was a great presentation. I think that we're going to be downloading this to our website. So if people want to listen again, it seemed that it was so rich that maybe some people will want to watch it again. So we're going to have that available. So thanks everybody for joining us. Lily, any other last announcement before we go?
Of course, we forgot our annual conference coming up,
Yes.
April 29, 30, and May 1st. So for those that were here this year, you'll remember it was a great, great session. So we'll put more out. We're just starting to organize it. We're a little behind time, but that's okay. So thank you everyone for joining us. Hope we'll see you again next month and subsequent months.
Take care.
Bye
Bye,
now.
everyone.